I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, 1923, December 22nd. My father came to the United States sometime around 1917 during the First World War to work on the railroads. And my mother came, I don't know how she got here, but she came to Lordsburg, New Mexico, and that's where they met, my father and my mother. And then they moved to Phoenix, and my father became a sharecropper, and we live in a cabin on a farm. That's where I was born. My father passed away in 1933, and both my father and my mother were undocumented, and they had no problem at that time. But then the Depression came after 1933, and the government began to repatriate people. So my mother, fearing that she would be repatriated to a city that she didn't want to go, she chose to move to Nogales, Sonora, which is across the border from Nogales, Arizona. And she wasn't about to leave us here, so she took us with her. We spent 8 years of my childhood, and I grew into a young boy. And there were the most critical years of my life. I went to school part-time, and I had to look after myself. My mother was illiterate, and in those times there were no jobs, especially in Mexico. So I had to fend for myself. I would go and chop wood for people or do anything I could to buy something to eat. I sold bread, I sold fruits, anything. Then I went to the railroad yards, and I happened to meet some people that work on taking care of cleaning the Pullman cars. And they offered me a job, 50 cents for washing all the silverware in the kitchen of the car, 50 cents Mexican money was 10 cents American money, so I earned 10 cents for doing half a day's job. But it was 10 cents. Then the Pullman crews would come in, and we would help them with their suitcases to the hotel. And so that gave me a little nickel or dime. Then they began I had a passport as an American citizen to cross the border. And the Pullman crews knew that in Mexico City and other parts, silk was very valuable, and so were cosmetics. So they began to buy that stuff in Nogales, Arizona. And they didn't want to pay the duty, so they had to contraband that across the border. So then that gave me a chance to make more money. So I began to pass women's hose, underwear hidden on my coat, and that gave me making more money then. I call it a lucrative job. But then I got caught one time, and they took me to jail. I spent a night in jail, and the judge figured that because I was an underage kid, they let me go. So that was the end of that job. I became 17 years old, then I decided that I was going to come back to Phoenix, where I was born. I had $5 in my pocket and a bus ticket. I arrived in Phoenix. I didn't know where. The bus station was near where all the outcast people were. So I had a little suitcase with me, and I noticed across the street was a hotel, $1 a night. So I started walking to the hotel, and a drunkard saw me and asked me if he could help me with my bag, with my suitcase. I said, no, I'm just going to the hotel. And a policeman saw him approach me. So he got on his car, came over and asked me if he was bothering me. I said, no. I could hardly understand English. I lost all my English. So I went and rented a hotel for a night. Next morning I got up and I didn't know what I was to do. Across the street were a restaurant that sold chili beans, or a bowl of chili beans for 5 cents. So I went and had a big breakfast there, chili beans. Then I saw some people across on the other side of the street waiting for something. So I went over and inquired. They were waiting to be picked up to go work in a farm. So I stood there too. And the truck came over and picked us all. And I went to work on a farm for the first time. And I lucked out that I didn't have to cut lettuce as rough as the other people. But they put me on a truck fixing up the cases, as the truck picked them up, I would stack them up. So I worked that day. I made $3.60. Man, that was big money for me. So I paid on that night at the hotel, but the next day I didn't get picked up. Then the following day, they picked me up and I went to another farm. And there were thinning new lettuce plants with a little hoe. And people were going pretty fast. And I never done that, so I began to kind of struggle along. The foreman came in and asked me, no, I noticed you're staying behind. Look, this is the way you do it. So I tried to imitate him, but still the others were way up ahead of me. So the foreman came over and says, I'm sorry, but I don't think you're going to make it. You're not doing it right. So I says, you're out. So I went way out in a farm and I didn't know where it was. So I had to wait all day for the other people to finish so I could go back to town. And I didn't have any lunch or anything, so there was some lettuce in the field there, so I ate some lettuce for lunch. Went back to the hotel. The next day, so I didn't get picked up. The following day either. So I began to downgrade. I saw a hotel that were renting cots on the second floor on a porch where all the drunkards were spending the night. So I went and rented a cot for 25 cents. And I met some fellows there. One fellow said, why don't we, I befriended the fellow and he says, why don't we jump on a train and go to Montana? They need sheep herders over there. I said, well, I never done that. And I was the type that I'd just, jump on a train and go somewhere. So I had half-sisters, but I didn't know where she lived. So I said, I'm looking for my half-sister. And so I spent a few nights, and every day I would go on looking for my sister. Finally, I found her in a farm, and she was glad to see me after all those years. And so I stayed with her about 3 weeks. And then my half-sister in Santa Paula found out that I was there, so she sent me a bus ticket. So I went on Greyhound, came to Santa Paula. I remember arriving in Los Angeles, and I got off the bus and went out from the station and looked at the big buildings, and that was in awe, I'd never seen so many tall buildings and a lot of people, sailors and soldiers, and I was in a different world. Well, I was waiting for the bus to bring me to Santa Paula. So then I got on the bus and I came, and I thought that, my life was before me. Felt like an open door with a big, broad field. And we went through Burbank, and I saw the airplane flying out of the Burbank airport, and I saw that excitement. We arrived in Fillmore, and the bus driver said, Santa Paula, next stop. So I began to look for the tall buildings in Santa Paula, and I couldn't see nothing but trees, And I was waiting to see a big city. So when I got here, I found out that it wasn't. So when I got to the bus station, my sister went over and recognized me and gave me a big hug, put me in her car and took me to her home. I spent about a month there. So my brother-in-law took me to pick lemons, but I didn't make it. I was at about an hour. I came with more scratches in my hands than lemons that I picked. So came home. Then they moved up north. People used to go for the crops over there. And we stopped in Morro Bay, and I work on a farm, spraying DDT without any mask or anything. I didn't know any better. And worked there about a couple of weeks. Then we move on to up north to San Jose, where I pick apricots. And then I lucked out and I got a job on a cannery. I was making 63 cents an hour. And but it was a steady job for the season. And then I got my letter from the government that I was to report for induction. I became of age 18 years old. Came back to Santa Paula, and I had a minister fill the papers for me. And I went for an examination in Fresno, it was. And I passed it, and I got a note that I was 1A, they would call me. And that same week, I noticed a bus with a bunch of guys that were being drafted. And so I decided I wanted to go with them. So I went over to the board and asked them if I could go in and say, yes, you sure can. So I went into the Army. They took us to Monterey for processing. They gave us all the shots and haircuts and the whole thing. They would line us up and begin to call our names. The sergeants they were from back east, and they would come to my name and they holler, Pineda. And I didn't know who Pineda was. So again, Pineda. I wouldn't answer. Then they say, Pineda. Then I said, here. I said, wake up, soldier. And I thought like saying, well, wake up yourself, But anyway, it was fun. Then from there they took us. I lucked out that I was going with about 11 guys from Santa Paula that spoke Spanish. So it took us to Texas, to Camp Bowie, Texas, where we passed our training, initial training. And so we took a training in Texas. Then they brought us to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And there, my office became a training battalion for artillery officers. We were there almost a year. Then I read on the paper where they were preparing for the landings in France. They were looking for parachute guys. And I was getting $31 a month. And they were paying $50 for parachute. So I decided, hey, there's more money. So applied, and my battalion commander called me. And he says, I understand you want to leave the battalion. And he asked me why. And I didn't want to tell him that I wanted more money. So I said, well, the guys here in this battalion, they make fun of me because I can't speak English. And he says, you know, I look at your records, your background, and I don't see anything that I could criticize in your life. He says, you stay here and you'll do well, he says. And if any of these guys bother you, kick them where it hurts and I'll support you. So that to me was a fatherly advice, you know, for the first time in many years. So I decided to stay. So we went from there to Camp Polk, Louisiana, where we trained for bigger cannons. And I became the trigger guy on the cannons. So from there, we went to Boston. From Boston, we went overseas. As we boarded the ship, I was put on guard at the bottom deck where all the black people, soldiers were. And my job was to allow them to smoke for 15 minutes in the hallway, and after 15 minutes ask them to leave, go back to their quarters. And how I stood that smoke is beside me. So finally I was relieved of my duty, and I walked up on deck, and I noticed that the ship was already on the seas. I looked back and I saw the outline of Boston, and at that moment I said, I wonder if I'll ever see this land again, you know. And took us 8 days to get to England. In England, we boarded a train and went to the south coast by the Channel, where we spent a month and a half. From there, they put us on landing barges and took us to France, to Rouen. From there, they took us to an orchard, apple orchard, where we put some pup tents, and we waited to be assigned somewhere on the front lines. And it was just rough terrain, and I went and bought a big French bread to use for a pillow. So on Christmas Eve of 1944, they boarded us in trucks. Our cannons were being pulled by tractors, fast-moving tractors, and they took us through Belgium, Holland, to the German border. Just before crossing the first river, the Hoare River. And it was there that I first experienced a German bomber coming and bombing. The first night that we were setting our gun, a bomber came by and dropped some bombs nearby, and I thought, man, I wonder if I'm going to be here tomorrow, you know. So we were there about a week. Then came the time to cross the river, and we had the greatest concentration of cannons the world has ever seen. That night, when we opened fire, there were cannons as far as the eye could see. We started bombarding the Germans across the river, and I could feel the earth tremble, yes, and airplanes on top fighting. And I guess our fire allowed the infantry to cross the river. And from then on, it was go-go. We crossed the river, went to our next obstacle was the Ryan River, and we went through the same thing. Crossed the Ryan River. From then on, it was move. We moved very fast. Sometimes we overtook the infantry, and we fought in different places until we got to the, I forget the name of the river. The last river we were to pass. Our target was Berlin. But when we got to that river, we found out that the Russians had beat us too. So they came and met us in the river there. And that was the end of the war. Then they took us back to a small village where we became troops that would take care of occupation troops. We were there about a couple of months. Then we all had numbers for discharge. So then our numbers came up. They brought us to Paris, outside of Paris to a camp there. And they gave me a chance to visit Paris, the Eiffel Tower and all that. And then from there we boarded a ship, and the plan was for us to come back to the States and retrain to go and help people in Japan. But it took us 14 days from France to the States. Halfway across the ocean, we heard that Japan had surrendered in a big hurrah. So we came back to the States, and about a month later, I was discharged. I was given $300 in discharge and a train pass from Houston to San Pedro. So I came back to Santa Paula where I had my girlfriend, and came back to my sister's home. And my mother, meanwhile, was, most of my pay, monthly pay, went to my mother. So I only got $10 a month for myself. So I used to iron clothes for my fellow soldiers to make some money. And so my mother got her papers and her green card, came to Santa Paula. My two younger brothers came with her. And she applied to a citizenship and became a citizen. I have something in common with the rest of the fellows, and we all share the past, and we support the present, I see a very troubled world. I see very troubled families, and I wonder myself, what's going to happen to this world? In my prayers, I pray for the governments of the world that they may find some way of working together, sharing, So as an individual, I've been very active in my community. I was on the school board for 8 years, 5 years on the Ventura County School Board, 11 years on the School Redistricting Committee, which I was chair for many years. So I've been very active. My life is not one of idleness. I try to keep busy doing something. I wrote a book, and so I'm asking myself, what else can you ask for? I'm very grateful for what has happened in my life. I have no regrets. I hate nobody, and I look forward to keep busy. I don't want to waste my life. Wherever I can help, I'm there.